The 48-hour deadline is almost up, and now the entire world is watching to see whether Donald Trump will actually order a strike on Iran's power and bridge infrastructure. According to the latest updates from the U.S., if Iran fails to reach an agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern Time on April 7th, the U.S. military will launch airstrikes targeting all of Iran's bridges and power plants. Regarding the issue of transit fees through the Strait of Hormuz, Trump has made his position very benefit from them. Now that Trump's real intentions are becoming obvious, that this conflict is largely about maximizing U.S. interests, it's worth examining the pros and cons behind this strategy. First, attacking Iran's civilian infrastructure, such as bridges and power plants, could indeed quickly paralyze the country's daily operations, leaving civilians without electricity or transportation. However, would this strategy actually break the will of the Iranian people and force the government to surrender? That seems unlikely. Historically, using the destruction of civilian infrastructure as a coercive tactic tends to fail strategically. Iran's resistance is not only rooted in national pride, but also in well-calculated military and political strategy. For example, on April 3rd, when U.S. forces reportedly destroyed an Iranian bridge, the Iranian public responded with unprecedented unity. Even more unexpectedly, Iran's counterattack came swiftly. Reports suggest that Iran shot down an F-15 fighter jet, forcing the pilot to eject before being rescued by U.S. forces. Although neither side released footage, and no third-party media confirmed all details, the outcome is clear. The U.S. suffered significant losses. This shows that behind America's aggressive posture lies immense financial expenditure. But how long can such a costly strategy be sustained? That's debatable. Meanwhile, Iran's internal cohesion continues to strengthen. Threatening civilian infrastructure is a double-edged sword. It harms the enemy, but also pushes oneself into greater danger. From another perspective, this is a high-risk strategic gamble. First, the international community has made it clear that targeting civilian infrastructure violates the Geneva Conventions and could constitute a war crime. Trump may not care about this, and he has even said as much. But the question is whether American citizens are willing to be dragged into turning their country into a rogue state in the upcoming midterm elections. Second, Trump has publicly threatened to destroy Iran's civilization, but Iran's civilization is not made up of bridges and power plants. It is the product of its people's wisdom and cultural heritage. As long as national spirit remains strong, a country cannot be defeated. If the U.S. destroys Iran's civilian infrastructure, but the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps still manages to launch effective counterattacks, it could lead to an endless cycle of retaliation, a nightmare scenario for both sides. In short, Trump's calculations may not be as smart as they seem. He is focusing on short-term gains while ignoring larger long-term risks. First, Iran will almost certainly retaliate fiercely. This should surprise no one. Iran has already stated that if its civilian infrastructure is attacked, it will escalate strikes against civilian infrastructure in Israel and Persian Gulf countries. Even if its power plants are destroyed, the Revolutionary Guard still has the capability to respond quickly. Iran's supreme leader has already made it clear that the Strait of Hormuz will no longer be something others can control at will. Iran is determined to resist to the end. Iran has also warned that if the U.S. crosses further red lines, it could block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This is not an empty threat. These two waterways are critical to global energy and trade. The Strait of Hormuz carries over 20% of the world's oil shipments, while the Bab el-Mandeb handles about 1/5 of global maritime trade. Western economies depend heavily on these routes. If Iran fully blocks them, the first countries to feel the impact would be the U.S. and Israel. Meanwhile, Israel's current situation is already quite serious. Reports indicate that its air defense ammunition has been depleted by over 80%. This means it may no longer have sufficient capacity to fully protect its population. Since April 1st, when Israel reportedly assassinated a commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy, Iran's attacks on Israel have been steadily increasing. At the same time, Israel's missile defense systems in some regions have shown signs of failure, indicating a severe shortage of interceptor missiles. Furthermore, on April 3rd to 4, China's embassy in Israel issued evacuation warnings. Typically, when embassies release such notices, it signals that the situation is becoming unstable. Israel is also facing pressure not only from Iran, but from a broader coalition of resistance forces. If Iran comes under further attack, the pressure on Israel will only intensify. Second, attacking Iran could become a classic case of hurting the enemy while damaging oneself. A global energy crisis would inevitably backfire on the United States. Although the U.S. exports oil, it still imports large quantities of refined petroleum products. A surge in oil prices would drive inflation higher, increase living costs, and weaken domestic support for Trump. In the end, this strategy could prove counterproductive. For now, All we can do is wait and see how Trump handles this situation, whether he pushes forward with military action or decides to pull back at the last moment.